You are watching the Merged Marketing Podcast. You are listening to the Merged Marketing Podcast. This is episode 132. And in this episode, we're talking about measurement and why the right measurement matters for marketers. My guest today is Lewis Rothkopf. Lewis, welcome to the show.
Yeah, Jay, thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Definitely. And you have quite a bit of experience in digital media, 20 plus years. I hope I'm not aging you here.
No, it's too much. The pro is I've seen it all, and the good, the not so good, and the areas for improvement. The bad news is I've seen it all, the good, not so good, and the areas of improvement. So taking that couple decades in this space and just trying to make it a better industry.
Yeah, I mean, 20 years in the digital space must feel like 60 in real human years because things move so quickly. My agency's only been in it for 7 years since I started this. And for us, it's been like there's been so many changes. Every 6 months, you have to be nimble, you have to be quick, you have to be on top of the latest trend. So, I mean, you must have seen a ton of changes in your 20 years.
So interesting. In some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. The technology has grown. The digital media buying industry has sort of migrated from the direct insertion order, faxing a contract back and forth to now 10 plus years programmatic, where it's much more automated and much more precise in whom you're able to reach with your messaging and then better understand what of it is working. What really hasn't changed are some of the fundamental problems that have been haunting digital media from the get-go. The first is measurement, right? We all know that click-through rate means pretty much nothing, and yet many marketers are still optimizing to it. The next is consumer privacy. There have been several over the past couple of decades, but not nearly enough movements to restore the consumer's privacy and make this a industry that respects consumers' right to be not identified, even without personally identifiable information. And we've seen some good strides taking place in recent months around building a more privacy-compliant media buying environment for the industry.
It's interesting because I mean, I know for a lot of marketers out there, they kind of roll their eyes anytime you say privacy and the hoops that you now need to jump through with GDPR or Castle Law here in Canada. Is in terms of what's your opinion on that? And do you find it's a competitive advantage for a lot of marketers out there if they do want to, if they're following privacy laws and following suit?
Yeah, great question. So it's a really good thing. What's good for consumers is good for the industry. I think many marketers understand, maybe even most understand, that if you want to keep marketing to consumers, you have to do so in a way that's respectful of their privacy. We're seeing changes come down the pipe very quickly, both in terms of GDPR, CCPA. Virtually every state here in the US is looking at adopting its own legislation along similar lines. There's federal legislation that is being looked at. These are all good things. Our opinion is that these changes can't possibly come soon enough. And by these changes, I'm principally talking about the changes that Apple made to its cross-app targeting and tracking, as well as to the upcoming changes that Google has made and will be making on Chrome. There are definitely those in the industry for whom those changes are frightening or even problematic. We don't think that our clients are among those groups. And the reason is, as you move away from these third-party cookies and move towards more de-identified and more privacy-centric ways of reaching consumers and understanding if your advertising worked, there will be a smaller audience of consumers who are opted in to receive targeted advertising, but that smaller audience will result in far more accurate and precise measurement and attribution because of the nature of many of these changes.
Yeah, it's a great point and a bit of a rabbit hole that I'd be interested in going down with you, Lewis. And that, my understanding of it, and as a Facebook marketer, is that, previously we were able to get much better results on Facebook because we're able to micro target a user on that specific device that they have. Where now it's kind of like you're sort of like throwing darts at a dartboard blindfolded, because now you're hitting a group of potentially 10 or 100,000 different people, where previously you're able to pinpoint that person on the device that they have. Now, with that is one challenge. And I want to dive into what is the remedy for that challenge that people are facing now.
There's a few different solutions that are being worked on and proposed. One of them is to use what's called authenticated traffic or logged in traffic. So these are people who log into into one site or platform when they're on that site or platform, and sometimes when they're even on federated sites and platforms, they're logged in. So much of measurement and attribution to date has been based upon probabilistic measures. So we think that this user is the same user who saw the ad. Depending upon the channel, it's more or less accurate, but it almost always has a sense of probabilistic as opposed to deterministic. With logged in users or authenticated traffic, it's 100% deterministic. Because the user is logged in and, of course, de-identified, the industry is able to understand precisely who saw the ad, again, in anonymous fashion, what action did they take based upon seeing the ad. And something that my company is really focused on is creating a real understanding of how many people saw the ad and took an action because they saw the ad versus how many people saw the ad, comma, and took an action that they probably were going to take anyhow, regardless of whether or not they saw the advertising. That's called incrementality, and it's something that's really important to our company.
That's it. I'm very interested in that. So, because you get that a lot. You get the ad that produces so well, creates a very high link click through rate, but on the other end of that click, nothing happens. It's crickets.
Yeah.
And naturally, and speaking specifically to Facebook and Instagram, when you tell Facebook or Instagram, I want to optimize for traffic, they're going to give you exactly that. They're going to give you people that have a tendency to click on ads and go to websites, but might not necessarily convert. So can you explain a little more about the technology with merged.ai that really dives into that, the incrementality? Is that what you called it?
That's right. It's
Yeah.
all based on incrementality, sometimes referred to as lift. And again, it is the delta between people who saw the ad and took an action because of it, and people who saw an ad and maybe took an action, but it might have been an action that they were planning to take anyhow. So just to put that into slightly more real world terms, let's say that you happen to be in market for a pair of sneakers, and you don't really know which sneakers you're going to buy. You kind of have some idea of what they're going to look like, what they're going to feel like. But you haven't settled on a brand, and you certainly haven't settled on a pair just yet. And then you see advertising from, let's say, Lewis's sneaker company. And you click on that advertising because you're thinking, yeah, this is great. I'd love to learn more about Lewis's sneaker company because I'm in market for sneakers. And then you take an action based upon having seen that advertising. Contrast that to you've decided you're going to go buy a pair of Lewis's sneakers. You've made up your mind. You've had good experiences with them in the past, or you just really like the look of them. You see an ad for Lewis's sneakers, but it's really immaterial because you were going to lewisssneakers.com to buy that specific pair from that specific merchant. And in the old world, the pre-incrementality world, you really had no way of separating those who took the action because or those who took the action coincidentally. And that led to a real misunderstanding of which advertising was working and where and why. It led to supply sources, media properties getting credit for the attribution, right, for the conversion that they maybe didn't deserve the credit for because it was going to take place regardless. And it led to marketers continuing to have the old Wanamaker problem of, I know that half my advertising works, I just don't know which half. And for too long in digital, that has been the challenge. So regardless of where your advertising sits in the marketing funnel, really regardless of the channel that you advertise on, the product, the industry, we can measure incrementality with a few different few different approaches to really begin to illustrate the causal relationship between advertising and conversions versus the correlation between advertising and conversions, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And to be clear, your Alexa is not listening to you. Okay, let's just be clear there.
To the best of my knowledge, that is the case, and I have no reason to doubt my knowledge. However, when you do go to 5 different sneaker websites, in all likelihood, you are being put in a category called sneaker intenders, and then you would drill a little bit further down, and you're in a category of red sneaker intenders, people who are in market for that type of item. And then based upon those in-market segments, well, now you're going to see ads that are targeted appropriately. You're probably also going to leverage something called lookalikes. So not just the people who visited 5 sneaker websites, but who also look a lot like the people who have similar behaviors. So maybe you haven't gone to 5 sneaker websites, but maybe you are seeing other sneaker stuff, and maybe you exhibit some of the same characteristics. Now, that sounds great because it makes your buy bigger, it adds to scale. What it also does is it brings an element of uncertainty into the mix. So if you're going to use these lookalikes, well, yes, now your target audience will be bigger, but the precision of that audience in its targeting will be lesser as you're adding an element of probabilistic to what can be a deterministic only approach.
In 2022, what are some of the most popular platforms that you see marketers leveraging, taking advantage of, and also benefiting from?
So there are 2 worlds, right? The first is the walled gardens, and the second is the open web. Google, Facebook, Amazon, Twitter are all, in their own ways, great tools for marketers to reach consumers, but they're not the only way. The open web is basically consisting of every publisher, media property, CTV channel, what have you, that is not a walled garden, that is open for public advertising and exists on quasi-public, publicly available, I should say, ad exchanges. If you're only as a marketer focused on and targeting the walled gardens, right? If you're only running on one of those properties or even 2 of them, you're missing out on reaching consumers in very different touch points. So my state of mind as a consumer is probably going to be pretty different from my state of mind when I'm on social media versus when I'm on a shopping website or a blog. And so we believe marketers really have to reach both audiences, both types of mindsets and touch points in order to have a holistic campaign execution. And look, I mean, we're an independent media buying platform. We serve the open web, we serve advertisers and agencies, but we're not ignorant, right? We're not crazy. We know that you got to buy YouTube, in all likelihood, you got to buy YouTube. The only place you can buy YouTube really is through Google's technology. We don't have access to it. Nobody on the large platform size, apart from Google, does. And so, yes, great, run on YouTube, but also run your video on the myriad broadcasters and the myriad online properties with online video and the myriad streaming audio properties, podcasts, announcer reads that consumers are engaging with a whole bunch of the time.
It's such a good point that I think a lot of marketers or small business owners and entrepreneurs ignore is the state of mind that people have when they're on social media. It's typically not the state of mind where they want to go and I'm going to go book 15 minutes out of my calendar to have a consultation, or I want to get off my Facebook experience or interrupt my Instagram experience to go over to this website and go browsing for shoes.
That's
It's
right.
typically not what people are thinking. I love to take the opportunity to use social media to get them off of social media and get that contact information and get them over to email, especially if you're a B2B. You want to get them in that, that work state of mind where they're on. Typically it's happening in email.
And you're absolutely right. And there's also insights that you can draw based upon various open web channels. One quick one is weather properties tend to perform quite well. Why? You go to the weather property of your choice, you check the weather, you check maybe the 5-day forecast, And then what, right? You're looking for a natural exit point. So in all likelihood, a ad on the weather property is going to perform quite well because the user has done what they came there to do. There's really not much else you can do with your knowledge of the weather other than understanding what it is. Maybe you click on a story about a hurricane or some other big weather event, but in all likelihood, you're just looking for your next thing. And you see an ad that's reasonably well targeted for the sorts of things that you're interested in. And you're thinking, hey, okay, yeah, let's learn more about Lewis's sneakers.
I love that, and it's something that I know a lot of people don't think about is that journey, right? Like
Yes.
somebody hitting the weather site, literally there for probably 20 to 30 seconds, and they're off onto the next thing. It's capturing them in that moment when their brain's switching from one thing to the next. One example
Yes.
that we own an asset. It's a Canadian real estate magazine. Does really well for SEO. Captures a lot of that high intent traffic from Google of people looking for markets to invest in Canada. But the longevity on the site is not entirely long, probably a couple minutes. They're consuming their article, but what you're bringing to light here, Lewis, is like, well, we should think about some of those banners that are advertising on that site, or the marketers that would be interested in those banners as that exit point, as you say.
That's right. And it's interesting if you look at that example, it's really the inverse of another interesting and useful approach, which is when marketers have the opportunity to recommend content following the consumption of an ad or an article. And you see these everywhere, right? These are native ads that fit with the look and feel of the property, and it keeps you on the site. You can also add related content advertising that takes you off the site and follows the same sort of trend as the weather properties, which are I watched my video, I watched some recommended videos, I kind of know all there is to know about Lewis's sneakers now. But oh, here's a story about why cats also love sneakers. I love cats, I love sneakers. Let me click on that. And so it really comes down to the right type of approach, the right type of creative for the medium that you're advertising on. The worst thing you can do is run the exact same ad across myriad platforms, the same on open web as on walled gardens, the same on, a weather site versus on a recipe site. You're really doing yourself a disservice if you don't take advantage of the unique attributes that each of those different yet important channels and media properties affords.
And would you say that because that repetition of the same ads over and over again, that ad frequency increasing with the same ads, people typically will have their blinders on for those ads?
There is an inflection point, right? So when you look at incrementality, one consistent theme is that you do need to hit consumers n number of times with an ad in order to win them over, right? And so that doesn't necessarily mean, in fact, that does not mean that you should run the exact same ad to them 15 times. You should take advantage of the things that technology allows you to do, like dynamically adjusting the creative based upon what? Based upon the user's interest, based upon the site itself that it's displaying upon. You should rotate creative across properties based upon similar things. You should even create different assets, different creative assets, depending upon the category of sites that you're running on, so that you are adding that element of variety and differentiation to it where it's not the exact same ad over and over and over. You also make a good point about banner blindness, which is that notion of I kind of focus right there, but I don't really look at what's above or beyond because I know that they're banners, and to an extent, that's true. But geez, your campaign can't only be banners in 2022, right? Banners are, I should say, display ads are one way to reach an audience. There's lots of other ways, right? Streaming audio, because if you're in your car and you're listening to a streaming audio or satellite audio, streaming audio podcast, and a commercial break comes on, particularly if it's an announcer read spot, you're not going to change the channel because it's a 15-second spot. If you're in your car or you're at the gym and you're running, you're not going to go and change the channel in all likelihood. You're also only able to listen to one thing at a time. right? So banner blindness is a thing because we can see multiple things at a time, and our eyes dart around, and I can be looking at you, and I can also be looking at the door and see if somebody's knocking on it. And you, the advertiser, have no way of knowing what I'm doing. I can only hear one thing at once. And so where attentiveness becomes a increasingly important currency for digital advertising, being able to mix that up between audio, display, connected television, even something like digital out of home, where you're reaching people on the literal highway or street corner, um, that creates this sort of multiplier effect where in running in multiple different categories is almost always more effective than running in any one channel in particular.
Okay, so Martin AI. Tell us a bit about Martin AI and who it's built for.
Martin is a demand side platform, a DSP. So we connect advertisers to a incredible scale of media properties across web pages, online video, connected television, over the top, streaming audio, native. And we allow them to do what's called programmatic advertising using real-time bidding. And so a marketer logs into our platform and they say, here's my objective. My objective could be driving online sales, driving visits to a website. It could be driving people into a physical store. It could be a lift in brand perception or an improvement in brand perception and awareness. And depending upon what those goals are, we're going to help them execute across different tactics. So they might say, I want to increase the awareness of my brand, but I really only want to spend this amount of money to do it. Or I really want to get people to convert on my website. I don't have any physical store locations. So literally the only thing that matters to me is people coming to my website and buying stuff. That is the conversion event. And then based upon what those events are, we'll help them measure the incrementality of how effective their campaign is by channel, by key performance indicator, and really take that knowledge to optimize, not have to wait for a campaign to be over, see results, and then by then it's too late to really have much impact on your current campaign. And then take that measurement that is accurate and precise, turn it into optimizations that wherever possible run in real time. So for something like online sales or website visits, we measure incrementality in real time. It's always on. And we're able to smartly bid for that advertiser in near real time based upon the things that we know about them, based upon the things we know about their goals. If you want to measure brand effectiveness, we work with a company called Lucid, which has I believe they call it a panel of panels of consumers who've opted in to answer questions based upon what they see online. And then they create a group of folks who have seen the advertising, a group of folks who have not seen it, and then measure the difference between the two and understand how effective their campaign was at raising brand awareness or improving perception of the brand. We do similar things for driving physical foot traffic to locations and so forth.
Awesome. If anybody in our audience, Lewis, wants to get in touch with you or have any questions, what's the best way for them to do that?
I would love nothing more than for them to email hello@martin.ai and visit our site at martin.ai. It's not one of those sites that's just a big brochure. If they were to click on news, we have multiple POVs and case studies on topics that are facing the industry, and we make those available freely to anyone, and we'd love for them to check it out.
Awesome. And if you are listening to this episode, go on over to merged.ca/podcast/132 to get all the show notes that Lewis has dropped today and the links that Lewis has dropped today. You can go over there and check it out. Lewis, we end every episode with the same question. That question's this: if you can choose one person, dead or alive, to represent your brand, who would it be and why?
Me. Of course. How many people?
You wouldn't be the first one. You wouldn't be the first one to say me.
Oh my goodness. One person dead, Mr. Wanamaker, right? Mr. Wanamaker, who lamented the difficulty in understanding what's working. We've built a solution for him and for all the marketers that followed.
Awesome. Well, go over and check out martin.ai. I am going to be checking out martin.ai after this episode. Lewis, thanks so much for joining us today. It's been awesome.
Yeah, this has been fun. Thank you, Jay. Good to be here.